Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. If I can have your attention. My name is Elaine Pluta, and I'm the chair of the CPA committee. Thank you for coming here tonight. Welcome. We're here to listen to you, and we will get started shortly. First, I'd like to have the committee members stand up and introduce themselves, please. All right, well, go ahead.
I'm Marco Crescentini. Good evening, everyone.
We didn't hear you, Mimi.
We didn't hear you. Who are you?
Louder,
Mimi Panic. Okay.
Thank you, Mimi.
So, Rosemary Arnold.
Mike Olseti, Kip Foley.
And Andrew McMahon. Oh,
Andrew McMahon.
Mike Sullivan.
Okay, so nobody's out there. Nope. Okay, but Mike, Andrew, you're gonna go back?
You got it.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you. So, any
members who are not here today?
Yes, Libby Hernandez is not here tonight, and I think that's it. Okay, and Mike Sullivan, who was here just a minute ago, he's a city councilor also, so he's one of our elected officials. And I don't think there's any other elected officials here tonight. No. Okay, thank you. So we'll get started. This is, okay, this is Roberta Cameron. She's our consultant advisor, #1 guru here tonight, and she's going to give you a presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of the committee members and to all of you who came out here this evening. It's very important to have this chance to listen to what Holyoke residents would like to see in their community with the Community Preservation Act. So just to give you an overview of what we're going to do this evening, we're going to start out with a presentation that I will give you first an overview of what is the Community Preservation Act, and then I'm going to give a summary of what we've learned so far in studying studying the community of Holyoke. What are your potential needs and what resources do you have throughout the city? And then we're going to have a discussion among each of you at your tables, so that we can learn a little bit more about, to give you a chance to respond to some ideas that have been generated so far in the process, so that you can help us to know what your priorities are and help the committee to set its priorities and goals. So first I'm going to begin just to get to know everyone in the room a little bit better, see who is really here. First, I'd like to know how many of you live in Holyoke. Everybody in the room lives in Holyoke. Almost everybody in the room. I think I met at least one person this evening who doesn't live here.
Yes.
Where are you from?
I'm sorry. I'm from Boston. Our company, Community Opportunities Group, is a planning consulting firm, and the Community Preservation Committee in Holyoke has hired us to come and help them to prepare this plan. And I'll describe a little bit more in detail why and what the plan is about as we go on. So I have also with me this evening my colleague Peter Sanborn, who helped to greet you when you came in the door. So he is also helping me with facilitating. So I would like to know next, how many of you attend school in Holyoke now? Attend school in Holyoke. Nobody is attending. How many of you ever attended school in Holyoke? A good number of you, but not everyone. Thank you. And how many work in Holyoke? Got a good number. And any other things that you do in Holyoke besides live and work here, go to school? Anything else that brings you here? Retired, yeah. Thank you. Recreate. Thank you. And so I'd like to get an idea how engaged all of you are in community activities in Holyoke. How many of you attend meetings or groups or are on boards and committees? and attend meetings once a week, at least. There's one of you out there. Once or twice a month. Got a good number of people once or twice a month. A few times a year. Okay, and this is your first meeting ever. All right. And so last question, how familiar are you with the Community Preservation Act? You would say that, how many would say that you're very familiar with it? Okay. You're somewhat familiar with it, you kind of know what it's all about, but you could learn more, and you really don't know very much at all. Okay. Then some of what I have to talk about this evening may be old news for some of you, but hopefully everybody will learn a little bit from the process and will kind of have the same understanding about CPA when we get to the end. So an overview, first of all, why are we here? What brought us here to talk about the Community Preservation Act in Holyoke? I'm going to start with, in 2000, the state legislature passed the Community Preservation Act. And this was state legislation that enables communities to raise funds locally that can be used specifically for certain types of local projects. And the local funds are matched, as I will get into further on, with state funding as well as an incentive for the communities to invest their own funds in their own needs. So this is a voluntary program. Holyoke, in the November 2016 election, Holyoke voters voted to adopt the Community Preservation Act. And so after Holyoke voted to adopt the Community Preservation Act, the city council established the Community Preservation Committee that has the responsibility to determine how the CPA funds are going to be used. And the committee has a responsibility under state law to determine, to study the community needs and resources in cooperation with the other departments and boards in the city, and to consult with the public to help to understand what the needs are so that they can make recommendations for how to use the CPA funds that the city raises. And so the 9-member committee was appointed in 2017, and the first thing that they're doing is to prepare this community preservation plan that fulfills that need to study what the community needs and goals and resources are. So that's where we are right now. The plan is in progress. We began by looking at what exists in the community, both using census data and other sources of information, looking at other plans that have been written in the past through public processes in Holyoke, and talking with stakeholders throughout the community who are either board members or members of organizations that intersect with Community Preservation Act program areas, which I will describe in a few minutes. So now we are at a point where we've learned a lot about the city, and we are ready to come and ask for the public to share your ideas so that we can incorporate and reflect on this in the plan. And then after the plan is completed, the Community Preservation Committee does not itself initiate projects that are using the funds. Rather, the committee is going to initiate an application process, a grant application process, so that city departments, boards and committees, nonprofit organizations, and other people in the community can apply to use the funds for projects that meet the goals and priorities that are identified in the plan. So that's what's going to happen after this plan is completed. So where do the funds come from? There are two sources of funding for the Community Preservation Act funds. The first is a surcharge on the property tax bill, a 1.5% surcharge that with exemptions, an automatic exemption for the first $100,000 of property value for every property in the city is exempt. And then people who have incomes less than 80% of area median income, so people with low incomes, can apply for an exemption annually with the assessor so that they can be exempt from paying the surcharge. And senior households with up to 100% of area median income can apply for the exemption. If anybody here didn't have a chance to see it, who might be interested in applying for an exemption, there's information on our information table out there about that. So the average surcharge for the average single-family home in Holyoke is $23 annually for the current year's tax bill. So the local revenue is then going to be matched with revenue from the state's Community Preservation Trust Fund. So the state collects revenue from fees at the registry on real estate transactions, and also the state legislature occasionally puts funding into the Community Preservation Act. And then those funds are going to be are distributed every year among all of the participating cities and towns. Communities that were early adopters had a great deal. The match was at 100%. All of the money that they raised, the state matched. Since so many communities have now joined in participating in the Community Preservation Act, the match has gotten lower every year, and this year the estimated match is at 11.5%. So how much funding are we looking at for the city of Holyoke? For the first year, the estimated revenue from the local surcharge is just under $500,000. And it is estimated that you'll raise slight increments more each year from local revenues, so approximately $500,000 a year in local revenues. And if the state match continues to be around 10 or 11%, that will be around $50,000 annually that you receive from the state. And the Community Preservation Act funds must be used in each of the program areas. The three program areas are open space and recreation, historic preservation, affordable housing are the three program areas. So a minimum of 10% of the funds each year must be spent or set aside for each of those program areas, and up to 5% can be spent on administrative costs, that is staff to support the committee, technical support that the committee might need to help them understand what are eligible projects, for example, and due diligence if there are projects that they need to do a little bit of research to make sure that it's a viable project. That can be covered under the administrative funds. So that leaves about 65 to 70% a year that you have discretion, the committee has discretion to determine which of these program areas they're going to use those funds for. So in more detail, what can you do with Community Preservation Act funds? The types of activities that are eligible are very specifically spelled out in the Community Preservation Act legislation. On the front and back handout that we had at the information table, if any of you picked that up, on the back side there's a colorful matrix that provides a summary of what are eligible activities that you can fund with CPA. And in more detail, the activities include, first, open space and recreation. You can acquire, create, preserve, rehabilitate, and restore assets through that qualify as open space and recreation. So open space might be watershed protection, aquifer recharge, agricultural land, forests, wetlands, habitat areas, and so forth. Recreation might include active or passive recreational uses, community gardens, trails, parks, playgrounds, athletic fields. All of these are qualifying recreation activities. They must be outdoor recreation. That's one important distinction. And they cannot be used for a stadium, gymnasium, or other type of structure, although there might be some types of structures that support outdoor recreation activities. Those don't qualify. In the program area of historic preservation, CPA funds can be used to acquire, preserve, rehabilitate, and restore historic resources. And these might include historic buildings, structures, vessels, property, documents, or artifacts that are either listed or eligible for listing on the State Register of Historic Places, or they can be determined by Holyoke's Historical Commission to be significant to the city's history. So if there's a historic asset that is not listed on the state register, then somebody interested in making an improvement using CPA funds would go to the Historic Commission to ask them to designate it as historic so that it would qualify. And finally, the program area of affordable housing. This includes housing for low and moderate income individuals and families at either 80% of area median income or 100% of area median income. I realize this may be too small for many of you to read, but it's on the front side of that front and back handout that was available earlier. A low-income household for at 80% of area median income, for a family of 4, by example, is around $50,000 a year. A moderate income is around $66,000 a year. For a 1 or 2 person household, it's around $40,000 a year is low income, and moderate income is around $50,000 a year. So that's the income levels that CPA funds can be used to support anything up to those income levels. So that actually concludes my overview of the Community Preservation Act. Before I go on, are there any questions about how it works? Yes?
So could you address this idea of open space where land is signed in perpetuity to be not used for something? And a lot of people don't know how sinister that is and how it can't be undone. And that's what
the question is whether I can address land that is preserved in perpetuity, that is, that it has written into the deed that it can't be used for anything forever, and how that might be something that you'd want to undo in the future and might not be able to undo. I can't exactly address that. The Community Preservation Act does not necessarily require that land be protected from use in perpetuity. It may be that these funds could be used to make improvements to land that the city already owns, or to acquire additional open space. And it would have to be a decision that the city would make in the future, and perhaps taking into consideration questions about whether you would want it to be protected from use in the long term or not. Any other questions about? Yes?
1.5% levy, is that only on dwellings, on residences?
The question is whether the 1.5% surcharge is only on residences. It is not. It is on every property in the city. So that is single-family homes, multifamily, and commercial property are all subject to the charge. The first $100,000 of every property is exempt. And the surcharge is on the final tax bill. That's sometimes a matter of confusion. Some people think that it's on the tax rate. It's not on the tax rate, it's on the tax bill. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes?
As far as the housing goes, is this something that the city would get into, owning housing? Or is this just for nonprofits or for more low-income housing?
That's a great question. The question is whether affordable housing through CPA means that the city would get into owning housing, or would it go to nonprofits? And the answer to that is that it can be a nonprofit that uses the funds, or the city. Typically, in affordable housing today, it's not efficient for the city itself to own or to develop affordable housing. That the city would be a partner with a private entity that can more efficiently be able to build and manage and maintain affordable housing. So that a private entity could seek funding through CPA to carry that out. And that's something that I would like to get into more. Yes.
As far as when somebody gets the appropriation or grant for housing or does this include properties that will not pay taxes to the city?
The question is whether funding is appropriated for affordable housing. Does that mean that it would not pay taxes to the city? So the affordable housing is taxable property. It's not tax exempt. So affordable housing will be paying be paying the surcharge just like every other property.
Are they paying taxes?
Would that be done through a grant process or through the underwriting loans to the rehabbers?
The question is whether it would be done through a grant process or underwriting of loans to rehabbers. It could be done either way. And that is something, I think that a grant program may be a simpler way to get started for the Community Preservation Committee, but it's possible that they could work out an arrangement to do it through a loan program where they recapture the funds. Yes?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, just to go back to the tax bill for a minute, that this year we were late getting started, so, and plus there were some things that happened citywide, in the city government that held up our tax bill. So whatever you got on your last tax bill for this surcharge is divided by 4 going forward. In other words, I paid $44 for my surcharge this past bill. So in 3 months, I'm going to pay $11. It'll be 11, 11, 11, and 11. So I just want to make sure everybody understands that this year you got it all in one lump sum. Going forward, it'll be every 3 months divided by 4, whatever you paid in this last
Thank
bill.
you. So I just want to repeat that for the microphone and as well as for people who couldn't hear. Elaine, the Community Preservation Committee Chair, just reminds us that this year, due to the tax bill coming out late, you had all 4 quarters in the first bill. And in future tax bills, you'll only be seeing a quarter in every bill.
We only have
2
2 quarters.
quarters?
We only have 2
No,
quarters.
there's 4.
It is 4 quarters,
Four
I'm
tax
told,
bills.
but I'm not.
There's 4 tax bills.
All right. Any more questions about CPA in general? Yes.
So isn't it true, though, if you allocate money for low-income housing, that's people who have, and the people who have the better housing, the higher valued housing, are doing most of the funding of it, but they don't get the benefit of that. If you end up with more low-income housing, you also have people that ultimately live in there, a lot of whom are on state aid, which the taxpayer also pays for. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. You build more low-income housing, and then you're also, more of your tax money is needed to support the people that move into the low-income.
Yeah, but you improve the quality of the buildings, and therefore you improve the tax base, because they're all taxed. Everything is taxed.
So there are a variety of low-income housing programs. I own a home and I benefit from a mass housing loan in order to do so and meet the requirements. And so, I own a home in order to make
In some cases, right. In other cases, the people living in them are highly funded by the state, which is by the taxpayer. So
Thank-
they're paying twice.
Thank you. I would like to give an opportunity for everyone to share their perspective, their ideas at the next section. But right now, I'd like to move on to the describing. I'm sorry, I got the to describing what we've learned. Some highlights of what we've learned so far in the plan, preparing the plan. So I began looking at resources and needs by preparing a profile of the city of Holyoke. I'm going to start with population, specifically population projections, because it's a really interesting story that's told when you compare population projections to what's actually happening today. So we see that the population is stable around 40,000 people in Holyoke. And over the next 15 years, the population is expected to grow, particularly among the older residents, people aged 50 to 64 and 65 and over. This group is expected to grow, and the group around age 20 to 34 is expected to decline a little bit. And this kind of follows national trends, demographic trends, where we see the largest demographic group growing older and into retirement, and there are fewer people, smaller age groups coming along behind them. So this follows national trends. But what's actually happened in Holyoke in the last 15 years is that we've seen a slight shrinking in the older age group. You're seeing a slight diminishing of the number of people in your older adults and senior population, and actually growing in that age 20 to 34 age group. And the people aged 20 to 34 have also brought with them some small children, as you see a small increase in the young children age group. And all of the other age groups have stayed about the same in the last 10 years. So we're seeing some demographic shifts in Holyoke. They're a little bit not what was expected. These population projections were prepared by the University of Massachusetts Donahue Institute. And we have what kind of people are living in Holyoke? About 34%, about a third of your households have children, and about the same proportion of your households have seniors, people over the age of 65. About 38% are non-families. Non-families include people who live alone, as well as people who live with other people who are not related to them. And about 30% of your households, that's included in that 38%, so about 30% of them are people living alone in Holyoke. And median household income, Holyoke is lower than other communities in the region. The median is about 38,800, so close to just under 40,000 is your median for Holyoke, compared with Hampton County, that is about $50,000 per year. But when you look at different types of households, you see some interesting disparities show up here as well. So families that are headed by a married couple have a higher income that's closer to the median. It's closer to Hampton County, actually. $75,000 is the median for married couple families, and about compared with $85,000 for Hampton County. Other family, non-family households, and senior households are a different story. Each of these categories has a household income of about $25,000 a year. So people living alone, that's in the non-family category, families in which there's not a married couple at the head of the family, and households that have seniors or headed by seniors over the age of 65 have about $25,000 a year income, compared with married couple families who on average have $75,000. That is all the highlights that I'm going to give on the, one other thing that I don't have it on the slide, but I thought it was also a very interesting piece of information, is to look at the geographic disparity in Holyoke. We looked at, just as an example, the four, I don't have the map, actually I'll move to the next slide that has the map. This neighborhood in Holyoke, the downtown neighborhood, compared with the rest of the city, the downtown neighborhood has an average household income of about $16,000 a year, compared with the rest of the city that has an average income of about $53,000 a year. So it's very distinct. So next, I'm going to talk a bit about the resources and assets that we identified among each of the program areas for CPA. This was no easy task, given that you have so much going on in the city of Holyoke that trying to summarize all this and boil it down into a plan that will be helpful is very challenging. But in terms of the open space and recreation, you happen to be in the process right now of preparing a new open space and recreation plan that is going to help to guide how the committee sees what the priorities are. So that's going to be helpful to work in partnership with your Office of Community Development that's already preparing a plan that looks at these needs citywide. You have about 8,500 acres of protected open space throughout Holyoke. That's all of the green on the map. That includes city-owned property, that's Holyoke Waterworks, Holyoke Gas and Electric, the Conservation Department. Those are primarily the city entities that are owning protected open space. And there's also state government, and there's some federal government land as well in that mix. And nonprofit entities, private nonprofits that own open space that they have permanently protected. This also includes parks and recreation, and different types of parks and recreation that you have include neighborhood parks, athletic fields and schoolyards, and Anniversary Park and Scotts Tower. Then you also have about 900 acres of open space that right now are unprotected. Those are primarily Chapter 61 lands and private recreation clubs. Chapter 61 lands are land that are taxed as agricultural land or forest land, but are still on the tax rolls. In terms of your historic preservation resources, these include public and institutional buildings. I've listed City Hall, War Memorial, Wisteria Hearst, the Armory, Railroad Station, Mater Dolorosa Church, and Victory Theater are some examples. I'm sure this is not an exhaustive list there. I could go on and on and on finding more properties to describe in the plan, but historic preservation resources also include sites and artifacts that CPA can potentially help to preserve. These include your canal systems and bridges, Pulaski Park, Veterans Park, memorials and monuments, cemeteries, the merry-go-round, and archaeological sites in the city. So again, these are just some examples. There are also innumerable privately owned buildings that historic preservation funding could be used to fix them up and improve them and keep them in a usable state. Finally, affordable housing. Before looking at what you have in terms of your affordable housing resources, I put together a profile of what your housing looks like in general in the city. So this is all of Holyoke's housing described. First, I looked at what kind of housing structures you have. About a third of your housing structures are single family, small multifamily, that is less than 2 to 4 family structures, and 5+ unit multifamily buildings. And about half of your existing dwelling units are 1 and 2 bedroom, and the remainder are 3 bedroom or more. And finally, about 58% are renter occupied, and 42% of your housing in the city is owner occupied. I looked at what are the affordability issues that you're seeing in the city today. And I first looked at how has the value of housing changed compared to household incomes over the past 15 years. And I found that for homeowners, the value changed about 80%, and the median homeowner income over this time changed about 40%. So the value of the cost of housing for homeowners has risen about twice as fast as household incomes. Compared with, for renters, it was about 3 times as fast. It was a 15% increase in renter incomes over the past 15 years compared with a 48% increase in rents over that time. So Holyoke has about 1,500 homeowners who are cost burdened. They're paying more than they can afford on housing. That's about a quarter of all of Holyoke's homeowners are cost burdened. And about half of your renters, that is over 4,000 renter households, are paying more than what they can afford on their housing. So that's all housing, that's not just affordable housing. Now to look at what you have for affordable housing in the city. You have about 20% of your housing citywide is considered to be subsidized housing. That's 3,300 some housing units citywide are considered to be subsidized. That to be considered subsidized housing, it has to have a long-term deed restriction that ensures that it will be affordable to households earning less than 80% of area median income, and to be rented or sold using a fair housing marketing process to find a person to occupy that unit. So that defines subsidized housing. One of the first things that jumped out at me at looking at your subsidized housing inventory is that nearly half of the housing units on your subsidized housing inventory, their long-term deed restrictions are going to expire within about the next 10 years. So 10 years from now, unless there's some intervention, you might only have 10% of your housing units on the subsidized housing inventory, and that other 10% will have gone to market rate. Your subsidized housing inventory includes 2,800 rental and just close to 500 home ownership units. So there's both rental and home ownership in that. And they benefit seniors, families, people with developmental disabilities. Group homes are included in the subsidized housing inventory. And it also includes units in mixed income developments. That is, some of the new developments, Cubit, Open Square, and Cabot Street Studios, are mostly market rate, but include a few affordable units in their mix. Besides subsidized housing, there are other types of housing programs. They include mobile vouchers. This is what's known as Section 8. Section 8 mobile vouchers are actually not part of the subsidized housing inventory. They are providing a subsidy directly to the renter to help them be able to afford the rent, as opposed to the subsidized housing inventory, which fixes the price at a price that a low-income household can afford. Then there are programs that help to rehabilitate houses, to put them in safe and decent condition. Temporary rental assistance to prevent or help people get out of homelessness, and first-time homebuyer assistance to help people who are on the edge to be able to become homeowners. And some of the affordable housing providers in the community include the Holyoke Housing Authority, One Holyoke, Valley Opportunity Council, Wayfinders, Habitat, Providence Ministries. We've talked with a lot of people in this process, and these are some of them. So with that, I'm actually right on schedule. Before I move on actually to our group exercise, I'd like to see if anyone has questions about what we just talked about, the profile and the assets. Yes?
So in terms of the assistance to first-time homebuyers, would that be like specifically for properties that a nonprofit owns, or like that were purchased with CPA funds, or could that be for any property?
A question is whether assistance to first-time homebuyers would be specifically for property that a nonprofit owns, or could it be in general?
Just like any, yeah. Would it have to have been a property that was purchased with CPA funds?
So the assistance to first-time homebuyers is a program that CPA could possibly fund if you have a nonprofit partner in the community who puts together a program and requests CPA funding to help to fund that program. So they would then establish those guidelines of how the program would work. Yes?
Just to clarify, on your chart, that on the previous page, go forward. There we are. In subsidized housing inventory, is there any cash actually paid to the owners of property that are the renters?
subsidized housing inventory, they are capped as to what they can charge. That is what makes them on the subsidized housing inventory.
Okay, so there is actually no dollar being paid to the owner of the building. The vast majority of what we're looking at is under that category rather than Section 8 housing.
Yes, yes. So the community CPA funds are most likely to support housing in this category of subsidized housing. Although Community Preservation Act funds can be used to assist households up to 100% of area median income if you determine that to be a need. So that's above the level that would qualify for the subsidized housing inventory. Thank you. All right, so I would like to move into the part of our activity this evening that will be a facilitated discussion. And so we're going to need to do a little bit of moving around first in order to make sure that this works. First of all, I need everyone to be at a table that has, I would say, at least 4 people at your table. So I'm going, as we get settled, my colleague Peter is handing out a set of papers for every table, and the facilitator is going to help to guide the conversation and to take notes of your conversation. If there's somebody else who's dying to take notes, actually, or if you would like to have your own note paper, we'll also pass out some notes so that people can take individual notes as well. The group notes are helpful so that we understand the whole conversation, but we don't want to miss anything that anybody wants to say. So after Peter passes out the first set, we will pass out some notes for every table. And so on the screen are a list of examples of potential projects or types of projects that could be funded with Community Preservation Act funds for open space and recreation specifically. So these include, you won't be able to see this and you don't have, I don't have this written down for you. So these include expanding access to the river, ponds, water-based recreation, acquire open space for water resource or habitat protection, improve trails in city-owned open space, connect with the New England Trail, for example, rehabilitate neighborhood playgrounds and parks, increase handicap accessibility of parks and open spaces, improve the former Mount Tom ski area, and extend Canal Walk and create pocket parks downtown. So these are just some ideas to give you a prompt. I would like to ask each of you, you'll have about 10 minutes for this conversation, to talk about it says on your note paper, on the screen is this list of ideas. Are there any that you would like to see funded over the next 5 years? And are there any other programs that you can think of that you would like to see CPA funding for? So essentially, what do you see as your priorities for open space and recreation?
Organization of younger kids playing group sports. And I know we contribute to the basketball. Yeah, he does. Yeah.
Okay, I am going to put the next slide on the screen, and it's time for you to wrap up the conversation about open space and recreation. And
Oh, good, all right.
all right. Thank you, everyone. There's a lot. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to need you to write down any last notes that you have about open space and recreation so that we can have a chance to talk about historic preservation.
Okay, we need to wrap up exercise 1.
So we're ready to move on to the second set of questions, which is regarding historic preservation. So on the screen, again, I have some examples of the kinds of things that can be, that might be potential CPA projects for historic preservation. They include preserving historic buildings and sites, preserving historic documents, records, and artifacts, acquiring historic properties for rehabilitation and reuse, and restoring historic buildings, perhaps to create affordable housing or to create some other type of use. In fact, because it gives some more specific examples, I'm going to put this slide back on the screen as inspiration. And you can, again, go back to your conversation, and now we'd like to take some notes about your conversation about historic preservation. Thank you.
You don't have the money. In the parking lot. Yeah, I mean, it like press the button for the access to or it doesn't work.
Okay, now I think it is time to move on to the affordable housing section of our discussion. Some examples of potential CPA projects for affordable housing might include developing new multifamily housing through adaptive reuse, for example, of old mill buildings, and brownfield redevelopment. Or it could be used to rehabilitate existing houses to create affordable units. So rehabilitating an existing house and then putting a long-term deed restriction on it so that it will be affordable to a lower moderate income household. To prevent existing affordable units from converting to market rate. That is, putting some more subsidy back into units that have expiring subsidies so that they can renew for the next generation. To help to facilitate infill development on vacant lots. That is, building new 1 and 2 family houses. So where there are vacant lots, building 1 or 2 family houses on those vacant lots to fill in the gaps in the neighborhood. To provide temporary rental assistance to prevent or end homelessness. And to provide first-time homebuyer assistance. And again, these are all examples of things that would most likely be carried out by private nonprofit entities, the way our affordable housing structures work today. Nonprofit entities might work in partnership with the city or in partnership with the housing authority in some cases, but these are examples of the kinds of affordable housing projects that might be relevant to Holyoke that CPA might be able to support. So, have at it. You've got 10 minutes to talk about affordable housing.
If I can add just one thing about this, very often group homes for developmentally disabled populations will be considered affordable housing. So if a nonprofit organization or something wants to do a group home for a special needs population, then that could fall under.
So I'm just going to repeat that using the microphone. An additional example that Peter provided is that CPA funds could be used to help support the development of group homes for developmentally disabled individuals. That would also count as affordable housing. Thank you.
In other words, we're giving them money, but we're going to get, the city's going to get them.
It would have to be a for-profit
So I wonder
that have like city trails.
I think there are probably any project just me.
There is a little bike path, and I know that they're gonna put those bike lanes in the ramps.
I've always denied that has funding. I mean,
Okay, everybody, I wanted to ask you to wrap up.
that's all we
Any last
have.
notes?
That's why we used to subsidize.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will also ask the facilitators to each sign at least one of your pages of notes and put your table number on all of the pages of notes. That way we can keep track of who to ask if we have any questions about your handwriting. So with that bit of housekeeping, I want to make sure that everybody heard me. Can I have everyone's attention, please? Thank you. So I'm just going to repeat that one last time. I'd like to ask all of the facilitators to sign at least one page of your notes and put your table number on all of the pages of notes so that I know who to ask if I have any trouble reading your handwriting later. So finally, I would like to spend about 15 minutes or so hearing a few comments from all of you about your table discussion from this evening. So I'm going to start with the first section of questions about open space and recreation. And can I have a volunteer to report back to the whole room what are a couple of the major points that your table had to say about open space and recreation? Raise your hand so I can give you the mic. A volunteer? If I don't get a volunteer, I'm going to call the table member. All right, I got one. Elaine?
But I'm the one going to report to you.
So I can face everyone. Okay, this is open space and recreation?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, the first thing that we talked about was Carlos Vega Park, that it needs work, so we were looking at parks specifically. The Montom area, improve and secure, plan to utilize it. Scott Tower, keep clean up and then keep it up. And then funding to oversee all these city projects, keep them secure and viable and kept up, because a lot of times there's been cleanups and that it hasn't been kept up after that. And sweep the streets more often.
Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone like to add anything about open space and recreation? Yes.
We had a lot of the same that Elaine just mentioned, but we also had river access improvement. That was a big one here at this table. There's so much river front in Holyoke, but very limited access, and so.
Thank you. Any last comments? Yes.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Thanks for being here, guys.
So we came up with a couple of items that seemed to be linked. I wrote them all down, and then we realized, well, they're all in that same area. So maybe funding projects that are close together may be linked, like Pulaski Park, the historic canal area, or some kind of canal walk, the Heritage Park, Veterans Park. All those are in the downtown area that could individually not be as great, but or yes, be as great, but together make way more impact than just 4 separate parks.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. You had one more comment about, okay, one more comment on open space and recreation.
We again had very similar ones about rehabbing the parks that we already have. We have so many opportunities in Holyoke. And an educational component. One of the biggest problems with Holyoke is that we have so many opportunities here. I have a talk program that I sponsor up at Mount Tom. We can't get the kids up there. There's no way for them to get up there. And we have the same problem. I know that Bill Finn has worked with Smith College kids, the kids learned environmental education, and then they worked with the vocational school, and then they took them up to Mount Tom. Well, that was all required a bus to get them out there and whatnot. And I know several people who don't even drive, and so they can't even get up to there. We need to make sure, as somebody else said, there are parks inside town or maintained. There's so many birding opportunities and whatnot within the city of Holyoke. If we utilize those areas, clean those areas up. But we need to encourage the young people. We need to have an educational component. Most of us are here are over 50 years of age. You know, it's like, okay, well, we've got to bring up the young people to respect what we're trying to do here, because otherwise we'll be left with a lack of interest in what we're trying to do anyway. And other than that, we agree. We're on all the same page pretty much here.
Thank you.
All right, so historic preservation. Does anybody have a couple of gems from their table that they'd like to share? Yep, over here.
So we had a lot of support for two projects under historic preservation, the Victory Theater and the merry-go-round came up time and time again in our conversations.
Those are two we didn't.
Thank you. More? All right.
Agreeing with everything that we heard from the other group so far, the one we really like to add to it, and everybody keep in mind, is that the opportunities there also to leverage the funds, what we have. If you've got $50,000 for a project at the Victory Theater, there's other funds, because you put that in, you may be able to qualify for a $500,000 grant and have the people out there doing the research on the matching grants and the multipliers that are available to really, this $500,000 could be $5 million if used properly.
Thank you. Anything more? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rich Ostrom. I'm the chair of the Historical Commission in Holyoke. There's actually a couple other members here this evening from the Historical Commission, and since we've come up a couple of times, I thought we could introduce them. Francis Wilson is here, and Paolo Ferrario, and Jim Sheehan. He was here earlier. And so we had a couple of things that came up. One of the big ones for us recently is the Richardson train station. This is a beautiful gem in the city that I'd like to see if we could do some work to preserve that. But overall, historic preservation in terms of CPA money, perhaps projects for us, is being able to inventory properties downtown and actually know what properties we have so that we can be ahead of the curve. We look at demolition by neglect is a big piece of what happens throughout the city. So if we can get assistance or help other groups that are looking to preserve parts of the city in that way, that is really important. So that came up. We had also a couple other things listed: the stained glass at City Hall, this project. So I'm trying to read the writing here. CPA money for residents to participate in historically significant homes to improve and raise the values of the homes in some way. CPA money can help individual homeowners in that way. And then we also mentioned the armory and the question of private money, or if a building is not owned privately, how that, or I'm sorry, if it is owned privately, how that affects CPA money.
Thank you. To answer that one question about how can whether CPA funds be used for property that is not publicly owned, it can be, as long as there's a public interest that's retained in that property, so that there is some public access, or that there's a historic preservation restriction that ensures that it remains historic going forward. Yes.
I had a little confusion on that. There was something brought up earlier that the preservation of the place would have to be declared an historic building.
Yes.
And that's an obstacle with the Richardson train station, that has not happened. And the current owners, HG&E, are not are against that happening?
So it would have to be declared by your local historical commission to be important to Holyoke. So that is a designation that only pertains to CPA funding, and it's not, it doesn't have any other strings attached to it.
What's the process for getting a local historical commission to designate?
What is the process for getting the local historic commission to designate a property as being significant? You write a letter to them, ask to be on their agenda, and you present your case, and they vote to declare it to be historic. I'd like to move on to ask for any highlights that you have from your conversation about historic preservation. I mean, the other one, affordable housing. Thank you. It's a long night already. Anybody, any volunteers to share with us about affordable housing? This is a group that is very shy to talk about affordable housing. I'm going to call on table 9. I don't think I've heard a lot from you.
Is that us? So one of the things we talked about was that whether it's old mill buildings or historic buildings that we can secure and get ready for investors, that we also thought that once those buildings go to affordable housing or in some way, some sort of housing, that we'd like to see it mixed up. So we'd like to see a group of people in market value, in affordable housing, and in group homes, so that we all learn from each other and learn to exist together.
One more comment about affordable housing?
Yes, our table felt that it should be important that the property be taxable when we're looking at affordable housing.
Okay, yeah.
One of the things that I think we wanted to emphasize over here was that this doesn't have to be a designation or a kind of activity that only benefits historic or affordable housing as such. If we were to use these funds to prioritize the rehabilitation of things like mill buildings and structures that would otherwise be lost to dilapidation, we can address several things that are of use to the city at once, and we can also support property values and thereby tax values by doing it. So, to some extent, you know, the more synergy we can get out of this, the better.
Thank you. So I want to make sure that we are able to wrap up when I said that we would. Okay, one more.
The other thing we talked about, which is more general, is that we hope that the CPC will make some kind of a comprehensive long-term plan on how to address all these issues so that it's not piecemeal, something here and something there and something there, but that it fits into some kind of a plan to improve things in the city going forward.
Thank you. That's a great segue. I want to just take a couple more responses that will, from the last page, the last section of the conversation discussion. This can be prioritizing overall, or what do you see as being most important to the city of Holyoke? I'm going to call on you, table 5.
So we had, again, a priority of historic preservation with the Victory Theater and the merry-go-round being two specific projects. And then second priority being preserving open space.
Thank you. I'm also going to take table 6. Anything from that page?
Okay. For the second part, we felt transparency is very important, and that respect for community input and residents' requests be acknowledged in some way. And that being said, Is someone going to look at this paperwork? And if so, who?
So we, Community Opportunities Group, is going to be taking this back with us this evening and transcribing all of the notes. And to the extent possible, we will include the notes that we've taken in a document that will become the city's afterwards. And we will use the input that we gathered from this evening to think conceptually about how to derive the goals and priorities for the city, along with input that we've also gathered from the stakeholder groups that we've talked with and from city staff and board and committee members that we've talked with in the process. Thank you. And one more.
We felt that one of the priorities should be that we should look at projects that bring employment.
Thank you. I would love to spend a lot more time listening to all of your ideas, but I would like to get you out of here at 8 o'clock this evening, and it is 8 o'clock. So I thank you once again all for being here. The next steps, this plan will be completed in June. So you'll be able to see the final plan after we've prepared it, and then the committee will be able to begin its application process. Any more questions, please see us afterward. And if you did not get a chance to answer our questions on the map inside the door, please take a moment to let us know where you live and what are your favorite places in Holyoke. And with that, good night, everyone.
Thank you.
We call Western Massachusetts.